Ayrton Senna drove some great Formula One cars during his career and also some not so great ones. So our job today is to rank them from top to bottom, and I've got Kevin Turner and Ben Anderson here to help me do this, and I don't think it's going to be that straightforward. Now, when we did this for Michael Schumacher, I started with the F2004 and put it straight to the top. For Senna, I'm starting at the bottom and I'm taking his two Tolmans because they both drove the 83 and 84 cars during his one season with the team. And unfortunately for Tolman, as plucky and underdog as they were at that time, I'm sticking those at the bottom. So I think we'll have the 83 car at the very bottom and the 84, where he did get some podiums and some great drives in that. And of course, he was driving it by the time he got to Monaco, a very famous race. But those two at the bottom, are we going to have an argument immediately, gentlemen?
Yep, I would like to put this under them.
The Williams FW16.
Yeah.
Only raced it 3 times, of course, but right at the bottom. Explain yourself, because he did get 3 pole positions in that car.
He did, but 0 points, and it is the car he died in, which surely has got to count against it quite significantly, hasn't it?
But does that make it worse than the Tolmans? He was never going to get a pole position in.
He wasn't,
Tolman,
but
was
he even scored a point in the 183. Didn't score a point in the FW16.
Ben, 94, as a Damon Hill fan, is a season that there are parts of it you look at quite fondly. How do you feel about what Kev's done there?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get carried away with the emotional pull of that car, obviously leading to Senna's demise. I think if he'd survived Imola 94, he would have scored many points in that car. One race has probably pushed Michael Schumacher for the championship. So I think you can make a very strong argument objectively for the FW16 to be much higher up in the list.
You say much higher. Why would it? Because when I look at this, I can say, right, Kev, I take your point entirely, but I would kind of stick it there. I was like, we'll get on to the rest of these cars, but
it's a front-running team. It's a car that challenged for the championship. Okay, it's a controversial season.
That's the point I think we have to come to, and Kev, you can explain this quite well. The version Senna raced wasn't necessarily going to fight for a championship, was it?
Yeah, so 94, obviously all the gizmos were taken off, and Williams were most advanced with that in 93, and I think taking them off created all sorts of aerodynamic instabilities, which they didn't solve until quite a substantial update for the French Grand Prix, which is obviously several races after Senna had been killed. So I think the Senna spec Williams was a much more flawed car than the one that Damon Hill almost won the championship with by Adelaide. I think that they turned it around really substantially. So yeah, I think that we probably have to differentiate between the FW16 that Senna drove and effectively a 16B.
Where do we want to go next? Do we want to go straight to the top, or do we want to stay in the 80s and look at some Lotuses? What do you reckon, Kev? You're still closest to the board.
Well, should we start with the Lotuses?
Okay.
You started with Tolman, so let's go from there. I know that this is going to get a disagreement with Ben straight away. So the top Lotus for me, the 99T.
The 87 car.
The 87 car.
So you're arguing for that up there. Now, I think I'm with Ben on this. Of the 3 Lotuses, that one is the one I would place lowest. It was the furthest off the pace. He arguably achieved the least in it.
It's the least fever as well, probably. But
looks good.
Yeah, but the main thing about that, well, 2 things actually. One, it's active suspension, so it's a more significant car than the other 2 Lotuses, and it starts the relationship that Senna had with Honda, which is, as we'll see when we come to the McLaren, is absolutely crucial for his career. So although I prefer these, I think that one, from a significance point of view, should be higher up. And the reason it was further off in pace was because of the active ride. They couldn't get the tyres to work in qualifying. So Senna went from qualifying king in the Renault turbos to, I think he had 1 pole in the 99T, but it gave him long tyre life, and he actually changed the way he approached the weekend, knowing that was the case. So I think that's a bit of a red herring, the pace thing. I think as a race car, it was especially at street tracks, it was particularly good.
What do you think, Ben? I always thought, and not just because they're painted the same, that the 85 and 86 cars would be quite hard to split. But I expected we'd be trying to split them kind of in a position we've stuck this one at the moment. I didn't think the 87 car would be in this discussion.
No, I would have probably had the 85 Lotus at the
So
top,
you took
of,
his
the,
first
top of the
win
Lotuses. Yeah, very important car for Senna's career, very successful, quick. The 87 Lotus, and they got destroyed by Williams that season, didn't they, with the same engine. The elements Kev mentions that are significant to Senna's career, they seem incidental to the car. You know, the relationship with Honda is something he would have done with the Honda engineers. That's the engine, that's not the car. So I'm not buying the argument that the 87 Lotus is a particularly great car, even if it was significant in Senna's development.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Okay, because right now, Kev, you're being 2-1'd on this. In that Ben and I feel that way. Can we split the 85 and the 86 cars, or are they too similar?
I think I'd put the 85 car ahead purely on the basis that Portugal 85.
Yeah,
that's got to be one of Senna's greatest drives. It was only his 16th Grand Prix from his first pole position, and he absolutely annihilated the field. And that car will always be associated with that race. So I'm happy to have the 97T, certainly ahead of the 98.
Yeah, so should we put the 98 below the 99 to give Kev a little bit back, Ben? For now.
That's
we can come back to these.
That's a fair enough compromise, I think. Yeah, the 97T has to go top because, as Kev mentioned, that race is the one that puts Senna undisputably on the map as going on to become one of the great drivers, doesn't it? So.
Now, we've done well to get this far into a video about Ayrton Senna and not really talked about any McLarens. So I think it's time. Most of our viewers will be screaming at their screen saying, just put the MP44 at the top and put us out of our misery. So I'll place it there briefly for now. From what we have left, can we make any case for another car that could go above the 1988 McLaren as number 1 in our list?
The MP45?
The 89 car.
89 car, and big influence for the 90 car. Very successful period for McLaren, and much more opposition for them as well.
This is a thing for me. The MP44 was against a handful of turbo opposition, while everyone else was normally aspirated getting ready for 89 when everybody was normally aspirated. So this car didn't win as many races, but it had a lot more opposition, I think. I think teams like Ferrari and Williams were much more on their game, or much more of a threat technically than we saw the year before. So I think there's a strong case for this as well. Kev, you've kept very quiet.
I have, because I like the idea of challenging the 4-4, but for me, it's not reliable enough. Like, you could make a case, and I'm sure Senna fans would do, that he lost the World Championship in 1989 because of reliability problems with the MP45. Their 4-4 had incredible reliability and did win more races. I agree with you about the level of the competition, but you've got to finish the races. And he was robbed of a couple of. I mean, Canada '89, for example, was one of his great races, which ended in retirement. And he didn't win the World Championship. Got beaten by his teammate, whereas he
got driven into by his teammate.
Could
have won the championship.
That's a whole different video. I think we could get into there. Could have won the championship, but did win the championship.
So first or second? Because I think that right now these are vying for the top 2 slots. Where do we go? I'll let you guys decide between you.
I think it's got to be second, even though I do like the idea of challenging the 4-4.
Ben?
Yeah, probably I'd have to concede, ultimately. The 4-4 was so dominant, and of course it did make Senna a world champion in a way that the subsequent years car didn't, for whatever reason. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that there was a bit of carryover into this car, but Kev, you've been looking into, for all of the Ayrton Senna content we're doing, and a bookazine that's coming out that people can buy, you've been looking into all the stories about these cars, and you've got a few interesting tales about this one, maybe not being as good as we might think.
So it was a development, as Ben says, of the 4.5, but they thought they'd spotted something in the wind tunnel, basically with the rear diffuser. Great numbers, but it had a flaw in that it stalled through certain corners, so it would be very inconsistent with handling. And if you think of the 1990 season, which was a fight with Ferrari, there are a few races where they just weren't in the ballpark, and Senna even spun at the British Grand Prix, well beaten by Ferrari both in France and Britain. And it wasn't really until I think the German Grand Prix where they kind of changed the rear end that it then came back into the championship hunt. So it was a flawed car basically. So I think it should be, we're heading down, round here. Oh, also, that's made me decide down there. Probably Senna's worst driving moment in that car as well at Suzuka in 1990. He said Prost took Senna out in 89. There's absolutely no question about what happened in 90. Yeah. So I think for that reason, it needs to be down there, even though, of course, it did win the championship.
Well, and also, Gerhard Berger was his teammate that year. Berger was no mug. He won races for Ferrari up to that point, but he didn't win a race in that car. So I always think if your teammate, obviously, we're not necessarily getting into some of the Lotuses on that discussion, but a World Championship winning car, but your teammate couldn't win a race, that probably means you were dragging something out of it, doesn't it?
Yes, and remember that Berger didn't fit in it either to start with. They actually had to make some quite serious bulkhead changes to try and get him in because of his lanky frame. So I think Gerhard was pretty uncomfortable in it, although he did take pole first time out, of course, at Phoenix.
Yeah, his debut. Now, of what we've got left, which is 91, 92 and 93, the least favourite for me is the 92 car. I think McLaren were blown away by Williams during this season. Honda had lost interest. They knew they were leaving at the end of the season anyway. So this is a really disappointing Ayrton Senna McLaren for me. And arguably, because he was nowhere near winning a world championship in this, it should definitely be below this one. And then we get into, well, he did win some races in it, so where does it fit with, say, the Lotus? What do you guys think of the 92 McLaren?
I kind of agree with you that it's not a great car. The beginning of Senna's kind of demotivation at McLaren.
Beginning of the end for him at McLaren. He was trying
absolutely.
to get into a Williams for 93, wasn't he? Because of this car.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's got to go below the Lotus. I would have said.
I think so, yeah. Because I mean, even we'll get onto the 93 car in a minute, but that did win through some virtuoso performances from him. Whereas the 92 wins he took, he kind of had a bit of luck, really. He was never going to beat. He struggled to beat Riccardo Patrese in the FW14B. Never mind Arjamazu, who's normally down the road. So yeah.
Well, he finished behind Michael Schumacher in the championship in that car as well.
Yeah, I mean, constant fights with Schumacher in 92 and 93.
Right, let's before we move on to the 93 car, there's a lot to talk about there. The 91, what I don't like about this car is that once Williams got their act together, arguably the 14 in its FW14 in its original state was a better car than this for me, and I feel that Williams' unreliability at the start of the season was what hurt it, and I don't think this was particularly special.
That was what I thought as well until I did this recent
That's why you're here.
research. Yeah. So I felt the same
Enlighten
way. And Senna pushed really hard with Honda and McLaren, but particularly Honda during 91 because he won the first 4 races because of Williams' unreliability, and then Williams came back at them. They looked like McLaren were really on the back foot, and then around about Hungary time. They've got the updates on the car, they've got the upgraded engine, and actually it's much closer again. And he takes pole and he holds the round at the Williams' off during the race. They were probably quicker race pace, but he had put it on pole, and he made a point of saying it wasn't a perfect lap, this is where the car is now. And I think at the end of the year, somewhere like Suzuka and Adelaide, the car was genuinely back with the Williams. So I think that's an example of turning things around. And I also think that it's arguably Senna's best season. We'll talk about 93 in a minute, but I think he's stopped making mistakes at this point. He stopped having these spins and going off. He's not getting involved quite so much in the back marker issues and all that sort of stuff. So that for me is a great season and a great story of turning it around. So I think the car was better than it probably is remembered for now.
So for the moment, does it sit in this big gap we've got?
I think it goes into there somewhere, yeah.
Now, I suspect that the 93 car can make a case to be up here. Certainly no match for the Williams as an entire package, but it was being hobbled by a customer Ford engine. For most of the season, they didn't even have close to what Benetton had as the works Ford Cosworth team. Excellent chassis. Senna potentially had his best season. You just said 91 was. 93 was a stellar season as well. One of his most famous races, Donington 93, of course, as well. Where does this fit in the mix? For me, and you know, these are magnets, they're not glue, so we can move them. For me, you can sit it in there because of what a great chassis it was. McLaren did a really good job, I think, of a lot of the driver aids as well that Williams led the way with, and McLaren were just starting to catch up. It's obviously perhaps hindered by the fact that he didn't have a quick teammate until Mika Hakkinen got in the car at the end of the year, but what do you guys think of the MP48, the 93 car, his last McLaren?
Not a universally loved car. I think Kev's case for the 91 car was quite compelling. With the 93 car, Senna was, by that stage, he was looking for a way out. We mentioned, 92, he was already looking across at Williams thinking, I want to be in that.
He barely had a contract at the start of 93.
Exactly.
They never knew if he was going to turn up.
Yeah, race by race deal. I mean, I guess McLaren did a good enough job to convince him to stay on, so it's testament to their team. But ultimately, he was prepared to drive for Williams for nothing if that's what it took, and he jumped ship. So no, I don't think it's a great car. I'm not a huge fan of the gizmo cars of that era anyway, so I would probably have it below the 91 car. Just
down one place. I mean, Kev, you made a compelling argument for that, so you happy with a straight switch?
Well, I'm going to argue slightly against myself, if you like, in the sense that when it started the season, it was about, I think it was 1.8 seconds off the pace, and you go to Adelaide, and I think that Senna, Mika Hakkinen replaces Michael Andretti, which I think is quite key to give you an idea where that car is. Michael Andretti fantastic IndyCar driver, but it didn't work for him in F1.
Hakkinen led on his debut for the team.
And out-qualified Senna and upset him in Portugal by being quicker. So I think the car was better than Andretti was showing, and by the end of the year, they have a shootout for pole between Prost, Hill, Hakkinen and Senna at Adelaide, and it's got a couple of tenths, and Senna tends to have the edge all the way through the weekend. That's just in dry running. So I think that in terms of progress during the course of the season, it's remarkable.
Championship was over by that point, though, wasn't
that's
it?
true, and I think the difference here is you're up against the fully motivated Nigel Mansell or Williams, and you've got a almost about to retire, just won the championship, Alain Prost.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, having said all that, I think swap them around anyway.
So you've argued against yourself and then for yourself.
And back again, yeah.
Kev loves that.
Yeah.
So we have a definitive list, but it's not set in stone just yet. We're into overtime. What's bothering both of you on that list? What would you like to change? You've basically got one shot each, I think, at making a change to the board, and then we're out. Ben, should we get into your Toro Rosso Tolman argument?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where it sits, but I do think the 84 Tolman deserves to be higher.
I'm having exactly the same thought process.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I mean, a race win.
How much higher? Are we talking 1 or 2 or even up to here?
Yeah, it could be somewhere in the middle. I mean, obviously, I disagree with the 99T being so high, but if we're agreeing that the 98T is the worst of the Lotuses, it could maybe slot between the 5B and the 98T. I just think, in that car.
Like that, Kev?
Well, I mean, it didn't win a race, but for much of the season they were a spec behind on the Michelin tyre. And when they got the final round in Portugal, Senna qualified third and finished third. So the only cars he finished behind were the 2 McLarens that had won the championship. And the following day he stayed on for testing and went even faster. So I think that was actually a genuinely really good car that was probably held back earlier on in the year. I think they started on Pirellis and then they switched to Michelins, which are a spec down. So he did have some dry weather performances in that as a rookie, and he admitted that he wasn't physically ready in 84 either. Had the Senna of 88, 89, 90 been in the car, maybe it would have won a race. Well, if the Monaco Grand Prix had been a couple of laps longer, we would have won in it anyway. So
Pat Simmons backs up the argument that Senna wasn't quite physically up to it in 84, but the fact that car performed so well in the dry, particularly at the end of the season, suggests for such a small team they did a really good job with that car, and it evokes that kind of 2008 Toro Rosso, Sebastian Vettel type affair, if you like making a mark in a really unfancied piece of machinery, and so I think that belongs, as I say, higher up the list.
A lot of good people at that team as well, who went on to obviously win races and championships with Benetton, so probably a better car than it's remembered as.
Well, that's a great thing about these lists as well. It's not purely which car is the fastest, which one did he win the most races in. There are all kinds of arguments we can make for moving these cars around, because if you put them all in a race, the Tolman's probably going to be at the back, but that's not really the point.
Couple more places for it, up above the 99T.
Oh, Kev, how do you feel about that?
I think that's a bit of a push.
Doesn't sound as flawed as the those
no,
two
I don't
cars
think
ahead of it, though.
That's probably
if
fair.
the tyres were the main
probably
thing
fair.
holding it back.
I think then if we do that, you're probably into the realms of the 4-5B is going to have to go up a little bit because it did win a championship. So
I'm happy with it where it is. I think, Ben,
I tried my best, Tolman.
Yeah. How do you feel about the FW16? Is that where it belongs, towards the bottom of this list?
That's tricky because I take the argument about the Senna spec and it being, a second row car basically all the time that he drove it, and he hauled it onto pole position for those races he did do in that car. But you could make arguments for other cars in the list only coming alive once they were updated later in the season, and just because Senna didn't drive it in that spec doesn't mean it ultimately wasn't a great car or a better car than it looked at the first part of the season. So you could make an argument for putting the FW16 higher on the basis, if you judge the car in the season, it was close to carrying Damon Hill to the World Championship. It was much more competitive than when it started. Just because Senna didn't drive it at that spec, does that really mean it belongs way down at the bottom?
Yes.
It's a Senna car, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he got closer. He won a race in every single car above it, except the Tolman, and he got closer to winning in that than he did in the FW16.
Yep, that's absolutely fair. So we're going to lock the list in there. As you can see, this debate could just run and run, and now it's over to you guys. Let us know in the comments, or let us know through our social media channels what we've got wrong, basically. I mean, you could change all of it. Like I said, they're magnets, they're not glue. We'll keep moving it around for you guys if you keep letting us know what you think. And make sure you look out for all of the great content being produced by Autosport, Motorsport.com, F1 Racing and Motorsport News as we look back on 25 years. It's now a quarter of a century since we lost Ayrton Senna.